Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the Polsky Center's Entrepreneurial Outlook on Media and Entertainment. My name is Nima Merchant, and I'm a Senior Associate Director at the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Before we get started, please go ahead and take a look at the chat. We're going to drop in a check-in link for you so that we know who's attending our event today. For our newcomers that are joining us for the first time, the Entrepreneurial Outlook was launched in 2019 as a look ahead to the new year in terms of opportunities, innovation, and trends. We've brought together entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, innovators, and ecosystem partners to provide a multifaceted perspective and discussion around several topics. Today's event on media and entertainment will be followed by our panel next week on cybersecurity. And while somewhat different from today's topic, we'll hope you'll be able to join us. We'll conclude the Entrepreneurial Outlooks with a panel on food innovation on February 26th. So please check out our website to learn about that event and other upcoming events as well. Before I introduce our moderator, I'd like to give a very special thanks to the law firm Loeb and Loeb for their generous support of the Entrepreneurial Outlook series. This is the second year that Loeb and Loeb has sponsored this series, and for that, we are very grateful. With that, I'd like to introduce our Saudia Davis. Saudia is the director for the Center for Creative Entrepreneurship, the pilot program of 2112 Chicago, and the Arts Alliance Illinois. Saudia brings with her 25 years in music, theater, film, visual arts, and entertainment experience, in addition to being a social entrepreneur. She was a natural fit for this panel, and we are ever so thankful for having her moderate today. So with that, Saudia, I will hand it over to you, and thank you again.
Thank you so much, Nima. I really appreciate you inviting me to engage this incredible conversation with some of the most amazing, innovative entertainment and media leaders. I would like to tell you that I am here in Chicago, joining you from 2112 at our new Comcast business startup studio. Today, we are going to speak with Stephen Gallanis. Stephen Gallanis is an American entrepreneur passionate about building strong, lasting relationships predicated on integrity, respect, and mutual trust. His passion for connecting people led him to found Cameo, a marketplace where fans can book personalized video shoutouts from their favorite people with Martin Blenko and Devon Townsend. Recognized as one of Hollywood's top innovators by THR, The Hollywood Reporter, Stephen has been named 40 under 40 by Crain's Chicago Business and Innovator of the Year, B2C by Chicago Eno. Cameo has forever altered the way fans can interact with their favorite celebrities. In 2020, Cameo topped Fast Company's list of the world's most innovative social media companies and was named one of the world's 50 most innovative companies in 2019. Cameo's corporate culture, it's exciting. It centers around 4 core values: roll out the red carpet, run through the walls, fight for simplicity, and make it memorable. We're so excited to have you, Stephen. We will be joined also by Andrew Sugerman. Andrew currently serves as president with Sketchy, a new visual learning platform that helps students effortlessly learn and recall information through a blend of art, story, spaced repetition, and memory place techniques. Building on its success with the medical school vertical, with more than 30% of the market, Sketchy is now creating the most engaging and effective educational services for students higher in education everywhere by combining visual storytelling with interactive learning. As an executive vice president with Disney Publishing and Digital Media, Andrew was responsible for this $3.2 billion global retail, $660 million earned revenue business, and for leading a global team of storytellers charged with creating and building communities through quality with Disney stories while growing Disney's franchises across multiple platforms, overseeing Disney's publishing worldwide. In 2020, Andrew developed, produced, and sold a film to STX Studios, I know those people, in partnership with Michael Bay. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us today. And Kennedy McGuire focuses on motion picture, television, podcast, and digital media, as well as traditional and branded entertainment. She represents clients in a wide variety of areas, including evaluating, negotiating, and drafting talent development, production and licensing agreements, primary for script and non-scripted programming, podcasts, as well as documentary films. She regularly negotiates television and documentary films, and Anne also assists the entertainment companies and their advertisers in negotiating sophisticated products and brand integration and placement agreements. She is a star, and we are so happy to have Anne. She also has significant experience in the areas of advertising and marketing law, particularly as it relates to new media platforms, and that's really what we're going to be talking about today. Welcome Luke Butler. Luke Butler is Senior Director of Startup Engagement for Comcast NBCUniversal. In this role, he leads the Lift Labs Accelerator powered by Techstars and overall programming for startups interested in working with and assessing opportunities at Comcast NBCUniversal. Previously, Luke led strategy and operations at Curelate, a fast-growing startup company headquartered in Philadelphia with offices in New York, Seattle, and London. He also served as Philadelphia's city government as chief of staff to the deputy mayor, special assistant to the mayor, and deputy press secretary, speechwriter to the mayor. So he's got some politics in there too. Luke has a bachelor's degree from the London School of Economics and Political Science and a master's degree in political policy from the University of Pennsylvania. You know what? You guys are here. Let's get it started.
Thanks, Saudia. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Welcome, welcome. So just, one of the things, that everybody's sort of focused on is, we're in the middle of a pandemic, COVID hit, and then all of a sudden it just sort of accelerated all of these different platforms in media. Before we jump into that, I would love if each one of you could tell everybody something that they just don't know, and let's just go from there. Something fun. Steve, go for it. Steven.
In 1988, I was named Chicago Tribune's best looking baby. How about that?
How can we follow that up? I don't know.
I don't know.
As part of it, I won a modeling contract with Kmart, so you guys can all be on a panel with a professional model today.
We'll have to add that to the resume.
If we weren't already intimidated, we are now, Stephen.
So Anne?
I've won no modeling contracts of any kind that I know of. I mean, mine would be more podcast related because that's my passion. I think the one thing a lot of people thought that podcasts would be hit hard by the pandemic, and luckily people are still listening. They're just changing where they're listening. So I'm happy to see that people are still engaging in this new and exciting medium.
Yeah. So Luke, what's something that somebody doesn't know?
Let me think. I have one which for any kind of live music fans out there, if you enjoy going to concerts and going to festivals, the Newport Folk Festival is the best musical experience that you will ever have, and I highly recommend it. I'm so hoping that we'll get back to Newport, Rhode Island this summer.
Nice. Andrew.
Let's see. I guess the fact that I spent 5 years in mainland China building a school chain for the Walt Disney Company, teaching children English as a second language through animation.
Wow, that's cool.
Here's the thing. I asked that, you guys, because, to ask your origin stories, you guys have done so much, and it really is helpful for those viewers and emerging entrepreneurs who are watching. They're your real people. Yeah, you've lifted some, large numbers with multiple B's behind it, right? So that's really awesome. Thanks for sharing. So getting back to how COVID has really accelerated multiple platforms, integration, how we're streaming versus, theatrical releases. Let's talk a little bit about it. I throw it out there.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. 2020 was a crazy year for every part of the sports and entertainment ecosystem. All at once, every single athlete, actor, musician on earth found themselves unemployed. And probably most painful, they weren't able to connect with their biggest fans. I remember when the NBA first talked about coming back with no fans, and LeBron James actually said, "I'm not even going to come back if there's no fans in the stands because that's who I play for." And you know, as you look at this, there's been so many new interesting formats. Obviously, Cameo was one that did really well from this, but I think of the emergence of new platforms like Clubhouse, for example, where, you know, yesterday I saw a tweet, or 2 days ago, and Elon Musk said him and Kanye West are about to have a conversation on Clubhouse. And in a world where the like literal campfire, or those, you know, going to a bar and meeting people, or coming to a forum like this and having that network, you know, humans are resilient. We've seen Zoom's daily active users increase from like 10 million to like 300 million overnight once COVID started. And it's just unlocked so much new connection. It enables like great panels like this to happen. And I think in this new world where we've had to be isolated from different people, location is no longer a variable, which is, you know, the limiting factor on who you can meet or who you can talk to or who you can share ideas from. And, you know, I think it's going to be really interesting to see as the world opens up, it's going to look very differently than it did before. And, you know, those were just some of the observations I've seen, but I'm sure we can all talk about this in our fields.
Yeah, I think building off of that, I mean, I think it's the content creators are resilient is definitely the lesson that came out of this. I think I represent a lot of unscripted reality producers in the television space, and you know, there was probably 2 to 3 weeks when everything shut down of just sheer panic, and then ideas popped up, just like you said. Comedians doing skits from home. You know, we'll figure out how to produce this in your backyard. We'll send you a camera, and then we'll do it all virtually. I mean, that's what really stood out to me. It's just you can't keep content creators and creativity down. They'll come up with a way to thrive no matter what the environment. And I agree with Stephen. I think after this, there's going to be all these new opportunities and new avenues for content creators to create and to reach their markets in different ways that we didn't even think about before the pandemic hit, and we had to think about them.
I think one thing that's been really exciting to see this year is that much of what has happened has been an acceleration of trends that were already starting to percolate. And what's been exciting is that the pandemic created an immediate need, but then technology kind of met that need and has enabled us to do new things. So if you think about, you know, film production, and whether it's on the distribution side, you know, the movie theater audience has been kind of flattening or declining for some time now. And so this move into going direct to consumers in their homes was happening. It's been accelerated by what we've seen this year. I think on the production side, you know, use of virtual production technology has been around for a long time, but now it's become the barriers to using it in terms of cost and compute and time, and some of the innovations that you've seen actually in the gaming industry being then ported over into film and television production. You know, that's really been accelerated and will kind of inform the industry for some time. So I think a lot of what you're seeing is just this acceleration that has been created by need, but enabled by technology.
And Luke, I think that's extremely, I think your point on production especially is one thing I've been thinking a lot about. You know, all of us have had to do many, you know, video interviews, but today the quality of being on CNBC is like equal to being on Zoom. So it's actually enabled, production to be facilitated. The barrier to entry has fallen pretty drastically. And, you know, I know like at NBCUniversal all over the place, right? Like, you know, somehow you had these huge newsrooms and all these people were needed to make a production, and somehow on a skeleton budget in Zoom, you know, the news went on and CNBC went on, and I just found that to be fascinating. So I thought that was a great point.
I mean, and I think Andrew, for sure, you can speak to this, just finishing with a production with Michael Bay.
Yeah, when we saw this all happening, I guess back in March, really when things first began to shut down, we saw two things. We saw the opportunity that whoever can make content is going to be in a pretty good place in a few months. And then the second is that the shuttering of the box office was going to open up the rise of premium VOD. And so we looked to hit both of those at the same time, and immediately got on a script and began figuring out with unions how to do a safe social distance production. And we leveraged technology in order to have very, very few people on set, and had remote viewing with, for example, Michael Bay was in Florida, and we were shooting in Los Angeles. So it was really leveraging technology to achieve a lot of things on the set to make it a reality. And I agree with Luke that the acceleration, I mean, I view it's probably half a decade that's been accelerated in the entertainment space in terms of definitively in distribution. And I agree on the video game technology side. I also think that on the learning side, and I know whoever has children out there that are going through this, that there is clearly a lot of issues with the learning tools that have been in place for a situation like this. And so, whether it's professors at the University of Chicago, or it's medical schools or high schools or elementary schools, there is going to be a definitive rise in ed tech over the next decade that this pandemic has ushered in, and there'll be no turning back. Like, it is definitely going to be a massive movement.
That's interesting you bring that up, because when we think about media and entertainment, we think about the industry, and I love that you have such a long legacy of entertainment and media with youth. And I wonder, much like what Stephen was saying, as far as individuals being spread out and being able to still do the work, does that then impact and change our school system in the physical building? Speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about, and let's level set for some people who don't know, DOV, direct to video on demand. And if you guys could kick out some of what that means for everybody who's listening.
PVOD, SVOD, MVP, like all of them. Like everyone throws acronyms around really fast, so no one actually knows what they're talking about. So PVOD is premium video on demand. So Amazon, Apple, SVOD, streaming video on demand, Netflix, Hulu, etc. So I would say that PVOD and SVOD have been definitive beneficiaries of everything that's gone on. You see Disney Plus's rise has been like unbelievably fast and deep. But I do think that to your point about distributed workforces and students, I'm really going to be excited to see what happens with workplaces when this is all done, in that we currently have employees scattered everywhere. I mean, in states all over the country, which 12 months ago that would have been unheard of, and now it's just commonplace and expected for just how to figure out how to make things work. I don't know if it's going to go back to the same idea of a central office for how these companies run. So that's for me, would be fascinating to see.
It's difficult to imagine that it will, Andrew, because it really becomes about competitiveness. And if you're trying to attract the best talent, if a competitive Stephen is able to go to somebody and say, look, you can live wherever you want and work at Cameo, but if I'm at Comcast and I say, well, you have to move to Philadelphia, the person's that puts us at a disadvantage. So I think it's hard to there'll be some people that need to be in the office, but I think the hybrid approach of having teams working remotely, I think is here to stay.
Yeah. Agreed.
One of the things that we did over the summer was we actually made the really difficult decision to get rid of our offices globally. We had offices in London and Chicago and LA, and we told our employees, we don't care where you live, as long as you have an internet and you're on. And before COVID, we had employees in 2 states in the U.S., in Illinois and in California. And today we have employees in 26 states. So we've seen some of our existing employees are taking us very literally, and they're moving to Minnesota to go back home, or they're going to Florida, or they're going to Texas, they're going to Colorado. So they're living where they want to live. But one interesting thing is the size of our company has actually doubled since we made this decision. So there's actually more employees at Cameo today that didn't work in an office than ever did. And in the last 6 months, we've fully up-leveled our C-suite. We hired a COO who's in the Bay Area. We'd never had anyone in the Bay Area before. We hired a CFO who's in New York. We'd never had anyone in New York before. We hired a CTO who's in Tampa Bay. We had nobody in Tampa Bay before. So, just literally, like, in a world where people actually want to come back to the offices, I'm now dealing with the situation where our people are all over the place. And the reason we decided the hybrid model didn't work is I really felt that nobody knew how long it would take for the world to get back together. But if people felt like it was going to go back eventually, they might not adopt some of the really necessary processes needed to run a fully distributed workforce. So I felt like burn the bridges, tell everyone we're not going back. Whatever issues we have, we're going to figure it out on Zoom. We're going to figure it out like this. And for us, that's worked well. But I do think you're also going to see in the future, there'll be companies that are competing against Cameo because they have an office, right? It's like, don't you want to see people? And don't you remember the free lunches and the bean bags? So I think it's going to sway both of these.
So this brings up a really good point, Stephen, and I'm going to bring Anne in here in a moment, but I want to address something because there's something to be said about quality of life. And so when people are able to go, like, I'd love to be at Muir Beach by the ocean working, right? But there's something to be said about the theory of random collisions, right? So you came out of 1871. I am a former member of 1871, also now working out of 2112, which is also a creative incubator, and Polsky Center has an incubator. And there's something to be said about when we bounce, right? And when we connect, and that resource that we were thinking we need, we ended up running into in the same space. So that's curious to see how that works. And then also I'm kind of curious about overhead, right? So for those business leaders out there who are now having individuals spread out, they're not paying for that retail, well, not necessarily retail, but that physical space. Yeah. So Anne, would you like to speak to that? I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, on the yeah, I mean, all my lawyer bells were going off. I mean, just to Stephen and Luke's point, certainly there's greater access to talent that you wouldn't have had before. You can get talent in the Bay Area, you can get talent in Tampa Bay, where you wouldn't have had access to that if you required them to move. But from like an employment law perspective, now you have like employment law from 52 states or whatever, 50 states, and 2 countries applying to your employees, and then I agree. I mean, in our firm, we've been talking about that too, because obviously law firms we've also been remote, and we're also talking about how do we come back, and how do we train junior lawyers, how do we make sure that they're having an experience, how do we make them feel the culture of our firm, because Loeb's very committed to having a very open and collegial culture, and that's very important to us, and it's very hard to transmit that virtually or make you feel part of a team virtually. So yeah, we're struggling with that too, and I think we are trying to bridge that gap of come into the office a little bit, but we're going to have vastly more flexibility than we had before. And if you need to go to, Minnesota and live for a month to take care of a parent or to see your family, go and do that. But we'd like to see you because we want to see you, and we want to have those interactions, and we want to, make sure you feel like you're part of our community and you're part of our team, because I think that's what a lot of, especially our younger associates and our mid-level associates have been struggling with. It's just, do they have an identity? Is this a place where I want to be? How do I know? Because I'm just in my apartment every day over and over again. I'm not really part of anything. I'm just, getting the work done. So I think that's what we have to work on. And law firms, of course, do that much worse than creative companies. So I'm sure you guys have much better ideas than we have to have overbalance.
Definitely speak to some of your clients with regards to podcast and reality TV, because one of the things that I find is interesting that we're talking about is that this has allowed for everybody to jump in the mix, right? Someone mentioned, content is out there. Talk to us a little bit about, your podcasters and your reality TV people.
Yeah.
We'll get to scripted also, but.
Well, I mean, a good example is one of our clients is Lemonada Media, and they launched in March of 2020. And, they had a slate, I think, of like 3 to 5 podcasts. And now they have 10 to 15, and they were able to grow hugely during the podcast because there's demand out there, and they were able to work with a lot of different partners. And the same things that you're talking about, there's so many different opportunities to work with people that you wouldn't have had an opportunity to otherwise. But there's also, luckily a shift in advertising and a more of a focus from the advertisers on podcasts and getting into those very direct to consumer and very sort of targeted markets where they feel like they can have a real impact. So I think that's been a great part of the pandemic for podcasters, especially because the barriers to entry are very low and you can do it from your closet. That really helps in making it thrive during the pandemic. But reality TV producers are the same way. I mean, they've been able to utilize all the technology that was talked about earlier in production and in the development, and having, like Luke said, technology meet them and do a lot of virtual certainly post-production, which scripted is taken advantage of too, but also, like Andrew was saying, actual production, having a showrunner in Florida and her director in California and actually shooting in Chicago. We've been able to do that in a way that we didn't even think about. We were just flying crews all over the country all the time because that was the way it was done. And now we're able to really take advantage of the acceleration in that technology, which is great.
I think the creativity piece is the one that I want to keep an eye on, because creativity and innovation remotely. There's something to be said when you walk by somebody's desk and you see an image on their screen or something on the desk and you start talking in an informal way, and that then triggers something else that triggers something else. And the creative process is somewhat organic. It's not like structured around, here's a 1-hour meeting and now we're going to be creative. And then I'm going to, so I think it's going to be figuring out how best to do that. And people are making it through. There's writers' rooms and things are happening. But I still think it's how to not lose the sort of like the more nebulous,
organic dialogue. Yeah.
Because in our business, we have we're a content creator on the learning side, and our content team gets together and they do a mind map exercise where they bring different people together, and they're doing it virtually. It's just how to make sure you don't lose sort of the magic in the DNA of that.
Yeah, and Andrew, I think all of us are thinking about how do we facilitate serendipity in a virtual world, right? And I'm with you. Like, I love walking into a room. I love whiteboarding. Those things just can't happen right now. And, we all have to be innovative to keep moving our businesses forward. And I think humans are pretty damn resilient. And, we find a way to make it through, and 100 years ago, people didn't have, there weren't even whiteboards and they didn't have offices and all that stuff. And somehow people built, pretty impressive things like the University of Chicago in the 1900s. So at the end of the day, like, I think, we have to find a way to leverage the technology. Work is not going to look like it did before. Creativity is going to have to evolve. And just because we don't have offices, that doesn't mean, we can't bring people together in the future, for a 1-week design sprint or things like that, or a writer's room. Oh, everybody's in LA, go get together at somebody's house, right? I think that stuff still happens, but it's not going to happen the same way it happened before, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Miro is the Miro boards are like what we're using, like hand over fist, like those virtual boards. I hear you.
Well, I got to say, Stephen, you speak of something that's really important, because as you guys are speaking, I'm thinking, well, maybe you just like fly everybody to a really warm, lovely place to connect every now and then, to like get everybody together. But speaking of something that's really cool and how Cameo literally impacted one of our ecosystem members, one of our members
sings the anthem actually for the Bulls, the Blackhawks. And, Jim Corneliuson, once the industry halted for, there were all sorts of other artists out there that were components of live performances. And he actually uses Cameo and was able to generate revenue during COVID and the serious lockdown. So these technologies are also helping to sustain not only individuals in their revenue and their ability to earn money, but in their spirit. There are so many artists that come through these doors, right? Whether they're musicians or filmmakers or fashion, where they're just trying to exercise that muscle. So for our entrepreneurs or business leaders who are listening to us, I'd love for the panel to talk about what can you imagine as maybe the next step? Okay, like where are the gaps right now? We see that technology is meeting the demand of making it possible, but let's talk about how can we make it better? Or I don't want to give away the secret sauce, but you guys, like everybody's sharing their codes. You know?
I think this is a great question. Number one of the other things that's happening, right now is the amount of fame in the world is exponentially increasing, and the underlying business models supporting all of that fame are growing linearly, or in some cases actually declining. So what you're seeing is a widening gap between fame and monetization. Today, there's 50 million people on Earth who consider themselves content creators, and who, if they had their choice, would make their living making the films that they want to do or creating the content that they want to do. But there's not that many of them that are supported. And when you look at YouTube, the top 3% of video creators are making 97% of all the ad revenue. In music, the top 1% of Spotify artists make 90% of the streaming revenue. In sports, 99% of athletes go broke 5 years after playing their last game. And in the SAG-AFTRA members, in the best of times, the oldest meme in Hollywood is the out-of-work actress or actor who's bartending or waiting tables, between being casted in a gig. And this problem's only going to exacerbate with one in three American teens want to be an influencer when they grow up. So the answer is not going to be the studios coming up with more money. The answer is not going to be the record labels changing their business model. The answer is not going to be YouTube suddenly going from talent make content for free and they sell ads against it and they make all the money. Everybody's going to have to move to direct to fan monetization, and that's going to be the biggest thing. Luke talked about how that's changing in the movie business. All the studios are now coming out and they're not needing to go to the box office anymore. They're selling directly to their fans, and I think direct to fan monetization is the only way that we're going to solve this widening gap between fame and monetization.
I think you're right, Stephen. I think that the traditional distribution models are not really going to work, and I think you're seeing really interesting innovations in platforms like TikTok, where the level of personalization and creating that sense of community, and that this is really responding to what I'm interested in and what I need, is vastly beyond, I think, where we are with more traditional forms of distribution like television. And so I think there's a huge amount to learn from what you're seeing in some of these newer social media platforms, what you're seeing in gaming. The fact that you now have concerts taking place in Fortnite and movie screenings, and there's a late night TV show in Animal Crossing. I mean, the opportunities to test things in this new environment, I think, will really inform. I mean, you can imagine not only are you using gaming techniques in film production, but you can use that environment and that universe, that metaverse, to test out new ideas, to get quick feedback that then kind of go back into the production process. So I think there's some of these kind of emerging platforms, I think, are really going to inform the mainstream kind of consumption of media and entertainment.
And I think when you look at it from the generational standpoint, like Gen X, Gen Y, Millennial, Gen Z, Alpha, like the media consumption is dramatically different generation to generation. And when you take the extremes of like Gen X and compare it to Alpha, it's it's almost like a different planet. It's like black and white television or radio versus like where we are today. So I think that and I do believe a lot of the PVOD and SVOD platforms, I think that a lot of them are focused on an older demographic and they're not seeing what's coming up the road. If you add, I think, all the consumption hours on all Netflix, Hulu, Disney, all of them combined, they don't equal close to what's on YouTube. So it's just understanding that Gen that Gen Z and Alpha and Millennial, to a certain extent, their consumption's changed. And I think that people have to be very, very ready to attack that. You know, and on the learning side, I think it's similar in that entertainment's moved more towards personalized and having sort of shorter engagement ways that they engage with audiences. On the learning side, I think everyone's realizing that engaging students through digital is virtually, like, it's just not happening. Like, people have taken textbooks and put them online and say, here's a video, watch this, or here's a teacher, watch that. And I think there's huge opportunity in finding the ways to take what works in gaming, what works in entertainment, and bring that into learning. And I think that there's really going to be a coming together of those pieces. Like, what is entertainment, what is learning, what is gaming? The three of those are going to start crisscrossing in different ways, and a huge opportunity.
I think the generational point is a really important one, Andrew. That, you know, if you think a couple weekends ago, we're all sitting there watching the Super Bowl, and you know, you got the game on TV. You can't have your friends over, so you probably got like a Zoom set up on your laptop. You know, if you're buying something, if you're ordering snacks through GoPuff on another app, you know, you're there for the ads. You're watching the ads, but nobody's buying anything, unless maybe it's a Jeep because Bruce told you to in such a beautiful and poignant way. But then you think about what the gaming experience is you've got this whole community, you've got constant interaction, you know, the level of kind of commerce and purchasing that you already have built in. I mean, last year there was $160 billion spent on gaming around the world. 74% of that, so 120 billion, was on in-game purchases. So some of the things that we're trying to think about when it comes to television around how do you create co-watching experiences? How do you create interactivity and community? How do you enable commerce? These have already been solved for in these other platforms. And so there's a lot to learn there, I think.
I want to clarify what Luke is speaking about for our entrepreneurs out there. Thank you so much for bringing that up, because one of our Diversify scholars, Industry, has created a platform where you can watch. And when they told me this, I was like, you can watch? Oh, you like that dress at the Academy Awards? You can click on it, see the brand. Oh, and you can purchase it. Oh, and you can communicate in the chats with your girlfriend, like, you got it first. There are only 5 left. I mean, this is really the way of what seemed amazing to me, but where so many people are catching up to this is where we're probably headed. In fact, that they do exist already. But then again, it's like, how do we then really get the focus in the innovation or the venture capitalists behind some of those emerging technologies? Anybody want to touch base on that?
Well, I think that's the real question, is how do we move studios and networks and, you know, folks that are, everybody's launching their own streaming service, which we all agree is sort of behind where we should be, right? And launching another streaming service is not really what we need. We need this kind of innovation. And how do we get the players that have the money in the market to put it into these kinds of technologies, to put, you know, to get behind these kinds of initiatives so that they're attracting those younger demographics. And like Andrew said, not just playing to, you know, Gen X and older. And that's where we really have to bridge the gap. And, you know, I'm hoping that to the point before, the pandemic accelerates that. But as far as I can tell so far, the focus has been more on just another streaming service and not the real kind of innovation that we need.
I think on the kind of the distribution side with the streaming services, it's interesting. You know, we've gone from this like bundled approach where one entity controls the content and the hardware and the connectivity, the access, and then kind of consumers said, well, we want more flexibility and choice, and so everything got unbundled, and now different players are controlling those different pieces, and consumers are realizing, well, actually that's as expensive, if not more expensive, than what I had in the first place. And also this choice that I thought that I wanted is a paradox, because there's so much stuff out there that I can't figure out, you know, what's really for me. And so now you're starting to see, you know, Verizon's offering Disney Plus as a package, and Disney Plus is being bundled with Hulu and ESPN Plus. So there's kind of this, it's like reverting back into this bundling model. And I think it's a fascinating time for television. It's kind of analogous to, you know, if you go back to 2007 when the first iPhone is launched, and if you thought about what the future of the mobile phone was at that time, and if you thought there was just better calls and better texting, you didn't see what was a complete transformation. I think when you think about the television, we're in that same point. The future of television is not just more content, it's more experiences. We have this huge billboard in people's homes, and it's become a focal point of their lives. What else can you do with that? With learning, with fitness, with commerce. I think it's a really interesting time. And I think the capital will follow. I think that there's so many proof points in these other platforms that investment is already starting to flow.
Well, and cracking, to your point, that discoverability, not like how do you find what's for you across the millions of different platforms? I mean, we have that in podcasts too. There's, over 1 million podcasts. How do you find the podcast you'd actually want to listen to? No one's really solved that. So I think that getting to that to really be able to focus and not just, recommending things that are adjacent, but really being able to target across all of the platforms what you'll actually be interested in and what you actually would find worth paying for.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious to know what questions are out there. I do have one question. We'll start off because I want to make sure that those who are watching get an opportunity to ask you guys some great questions. What do you think about the physical space, right? Like studios. If someone's building, here in Illinois, there is a race to get more physical spaces for content to be created. And yet we're talking about a lot of content being created virtually. What are your thoughts? Maybe, Andrew.
I think that there's still going to be a demand for physical space. Like I would say the consumption of content has never been greater. People are consuming huge amounts of content. So I think that the amount of content that's going to be produced is only going to grow. And yeah, they're going to definitely be using game engines and virtual capabilities to make content, but they're also going to need physical spaces to do so. And I think that would bring up things like tax incentives where people are going to Canada and other locations. So it's not just about building the building. It's going to be what incentives do you put in place that would drive someone to go to that location?
Yeah, we have a pretty aggressive tax incentive. We're working on, though, above the line, which would be great for outside talent. So thank you for answering that. All right, let's see. What do we have here? Do we have any questions from our audience? And if not, that's okay. We'll make sure.
Yeah, we have some in the Q&A section here.
Oh, thank you. Let's get to it. Okay, Mark, to CEO of Cameo, that would be Stephen. Who was your first client and how did they react and how did your process expand?
I think by client, we're asking about the first customer or the first talent. I'm not sure, so I'll answer both. The first customer we had, or the first talent on Cameo was a guy named Cassius Marsh, who is a defensive end for the Seattle Seahawks. And the first client we had was actually a father who booked Cassius Marsh to surprise his daughter for her birthday. And she's a diehard Seahawks fan. And he actually recorded the reaction video that his daughter had when she got the video. And she was so happy that she started crying, because this was her favorite person in the world talking to her. So the second we sold our first Cameo, we actually had pretty high conviction that if we could make one person feel like that, there's a lot of people that would feel like that. We just had to figure out how to get them to do it over and over and over again.
Stephen, my wife is a customer of yours. She got me for my birthday this year a Cameo from one of the contestants from the Great British Baking Show.
Ooh.
And then a guy from a show that I used to watch as a kid in England, who I not thought about in like 15 years. And he popped up on my phone. It was, I mean, it's funny because these are like minor figures, but it was like really, it was a fun experience. It was a really kind of meaningful gift.
The thing that's cool about that, right, is that showed you how well your wife knows that actually knows you. She could go through the tens of thousands of people and find that, that minor character from a show you used to love but haven't thought about forever. It actually is a way to show them how well they know you.
Yeah.
Plus, look at the market for reality TV people and game show and contestants. Look, it's a whole nother market where their fans can talk directly to them and interact directly with them. It's a great expansion of it.
There's another question here. Could your creative process hit a wall from big tech monopolies, barriers to entry, copyright infringement?
I think this would be true for like any consumer, tech platform. I was thinking, I was watching CNBC 2 days ago, and Clubhouse is this buzzy app that people are talking about, and Twitter has just fully copied it and putting it out there. In December, Facebook announced that they were going to be cloning Cameo, and when I talked to Evan Spiegel, the Snapchat CEO, about it, he just said, Stephen, welcome to the big leagues, right? So I think anytime something's working, the bigger you get, the more competitive, you're going to see. You had Instagram going after YouTube with IGTV last year. You had them going after TikTok with Reels. Everybody's fighting over social shopping. That's probably the next great frontier. Social commerce, you go to Instagram right now, and what you were talking about, that platform, like you see a model that you like, and here's the dress she's wearing, you can go buy it there. I think social commerce, it's still big in China, and it just hasn't gotten that big here yet. So people are looking to the East for inspiration, and the big tech platforms are all looking at each other for inspiration. I mean, I worked at LinkedIn, and we now have stories on LinkedIn, which was copying Snapchat from 10 years ago. So I think you're going to see a lot of these platforms continue to take ideas that are working and try to do it themselves. And in the media space, right, you've seen this with all the streaming platforms.
And I think the question talked about the kind of the big tech monopolies kind of harming creativity. I think actually what we're seeing is a democratization. The barriers are lower, the costs are lower. To Stephen's point, the ability for people to get to their consumers has increased. And so I think Andrew's right. The technology can only do so much in the creative process. You have to have a good story to create a good final product. Technology is not going to deliver that. But I think overall, I think the trend is towards greater creativity, more participants, and I kind of that breaking up of the hold of a few big studios or a few big media companies.
And in my view, having been at Disney for 12 years, innovation is always going to come from small companies on the outside that are taking risks and taking shots and wanting to push things in new directions in ways that big companies struggle with, because just the way they're built. And so I think that I don't see that changing anytime soon.
So what do you guys think, what do you see as the future of live in-person entertainment experience, particularly small scale music venues, theaters, etc.? Where do they fit in the ecosystem?
I think there's always going to be a place to Luke's point, with the desire to go back to Rhode Island. I think there's always a place for the live festival. There's always a place for live music. I mean, there's a lot of speculation that after this all ends, there'll be a roaring 20s reaction, and everyone will want to go back and, just be with people outside, inside, wherever they can, and see as much live music and theater as possible. I know we have a big theater practice, and our producers are dying to produce something. And luckily we've been able to be somewhat innovative with interactive plays and such, but it's not the same as the Broadway experience. So I don't think that market is going anywhere. I think people are desperate for it to come back. And I think, to Andrew's point, it's also those smaller theaters and those smaller venues are really the hub of a lot of innovation. That's where new ideas that's where Hamilton was launched. I mean, these sorts of new ideas are able to be incubated in those kinds of theaters and those kinds of venues, and you don't want to lose that. So I think that's, as soon as we can get those back, people will be eager to re-engage in those.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I also think that some of the technologies that we've seen to make virtual events work will actually be integrated. So I think you're going to see more hybrid events. It's kind of crazy. Like, if there's a great live music venue you like going to in Chicago, like, why do you actually have to go see it? You don't have to go to a Chicago Blackhawks game to watch the Blackhawks. So I actually think you'll see some of these smaller venues, opening up, distribution to people outside of their markets, or people that aren't going to show up to the venue. And ultimately that could, lead to a lot greater scale for artists of all types, small venues. So I couldn't be more bullish.
I'm
I'm going to ask this question, even though I feel like we've covered it, but I'm going to ask it just because there's a nuance. As television media evolves, do you think it's best to create topic-specific TV channels, podcast, that focus on specific areas, or should we think of ways to integrate a variety of topics on one broad TV channel streaming platform? Which model works best?
I mean, I would think my gut reaction would be focus is always better, like to hone in on an audience and really deliver to that audience in a way that you like just overperform and they love you and they want to come there. I think that's hard when you scatter yourself all over the place, unless you're an aggregator and you're pulling together channels that already exist. But for me, it would be focus.
And I agree with Andrew. I think you're going to see more. I mean, we through our accelerator, we've been working with a company called Afroland TV, and that is a platform specifically for content created by filmmakers and TV makers on the African continent. And so they're really focusing on a particular type of creator. But I think to Anne's point from earlier, the latter scenario that you described, Saudia, is kind of what we have now. You have these platforms that have a variety of different content. The challenge is with all of these very kind of focused specific areas, how do you surface that? How do people discover it? And how do those aggregators make it as easy as possible to pull content that you might be interested in wherever it's coming from?
Yeah, that's the key. I mean, the beauty of especially podcasts is low barrier entry and ability to be very specific. There's a podcast about people who like pens and like very specific pens. And this is obviously not a huge market, although I like pens maybe, but it's not a huge market. But to Luke's point, you have to be able to find it. If you don't know that that's there, then it doesn't do you a whole lot of good. So I think it's overperforming for your audience, but also, figuring out a way to market yourself so that your audience can find you. And that's the bridge we need to gap at this point.
And I think you get a big word of mouth viral impact off of it when you focus that way, because people talk about you as being that solution provider. For Sketchy, it was all about medical students that started out with 4 guys, and next thing you know, 30% of every medical school student in the United States is using it, and it's because they all spoke about it because they over delivered and gave that group what they wanted.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and jump in with 2 more questions. What do you think about the potential for using entertainment media and gaming for social justice? Specifically, what are audience's interests and personal incentives to access the content on their own versus current model of implicit bias media / training having to be imposed on them?
Wow. So I'll give a little bit on this because it's pretty current for us. We just published a statement on our side this week around equity and non-racial sort of approach to content creation, and I think that it's looking at every form of media, whether it's video games, television, podcasting, that implicit bias exists because there's creators that have a bias in what they're making, and it's how to get at the heart of that and create a system where people are really thinking about storytelling through all the lenses. And the best way to do that is to have diversity in the creative side, and not just on one side of the camera, but everywhere.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. Because when we were little, some of the commercial, like not commercials, but commercials, and some of the cartoons that we used to watch, if you look back, you're like, wait a minute, that was not cool. One of the things that we're starting to see is, I love macro, right? But it's specifically Black content. And I'm looking forward to this integration process of wherever you show up, you have options instead of silos beginning to sort of kick in again. One last question, and this is on a hardware. This is good because what are hardware innovations you see coming up in the horizon? Do you see a platform beyond TV screens and mobile devices?
I think
Luke, what are you saying? Yeah.
I think there is, as we talked about earlier, there's more to see, I think, when it comes to television and how those mobile devices or second screens interact with the television. I think the other area that has kind of been hovering out there for a while is around augmented reality and virtual reality. And again, some of the devices that you see starting to come with glasses and things that make it a little bit easier and more intuitive. But I think the jury is still out there.
Well, and more creators creating for AR and VR. And I think when you get a diversity of creators creating for it, that's when you'll get more interest. And I think it'll pick up even more.
Well, thank everybody so much. Nima, you're back. Thank you so much, all of you. Brilliant minds. Let's make some magic happen.
Thank you. Huge thanks to Saudia and Stephen, Luke, Andrew. Today was absolutely fantastic. I know there were lots of folks that were on today. Really, really exciting stuff for the year ahead, and a nice look at sort of what has come out of this past year. Before folks log off, if you wouldn't mind filling out our survey, we'd love to hear what you think of this event. As a reminder, our next Entrepreneurial Outlook will be next Friday on cybersecurity from 12 to noon. Very different topic, but we hope you'll join us. And be sure to check out the Polsky website, polsky.uchicago.edu, to learn about upcoming events, sign up for our mentorship program, as well as our library on demand, Polsky on Demand, for additional offerings. And huge thanks again to all of you that joined us and our wonderful panelists, and for you, Saudia. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
And thanks,
Thank
Stephen.
you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Luke at Comcast.
Yay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Nima. Thanks for having us.